So this video is gonna be not just what I read in January, but also what I read in December, because I went on break in early December. Anyway, the point is, I'm going over what I've read the last basically month and a half, last 2 months. Now, a lot of the books that I read in the last 2 months were plays. So I'm not going to be reviewing any of the plays that I read. Most of the plays that I read were for school or just to refamiliarize myself with them for my theater classes. So we're just gonna ignore all of the plays that I read, unfortunately, and I'm not gonna talk about them. If you really care to know what I felt about them, go find my reviews on Goodreads and check it out. December 1st, I finished reading A Hero for Wondla, which is the second book in the Wondla series by Toni DiTerlizzi. I borrowed it from the library, so I do not have a physical copy of it. I started this series a long time ago. I started reading it back, I think, when the first book first came out, and the other rest of the series wasn't out yet, so I didn't finish the series. So I went back and I reread Thirst for Wondla, and I finished A Hero for Wondla in December. And then I also finished the final book in January, which is called The Battle for Wondla. And I really enjoyed this series. It's a middle grade series about a girl named Eva, who lives in basically this underground bunker, and she's being raised by a robot. And early on, she has to flee her sanctuary because there's somebody after her, and she has to go like above ground. She's completely out of her element. She doesn't know where she is or what she's doing or what all of these creatures are, because the training that she went under did not prepare her at all for the things that she actually finds on the surface of the planet. It's a really fascinating little series. It's very cute. I think that the message is very wholesome, very positive, family oriented. She's like searching for people where she belongs. I will say I went into this series thinking it was like a retelling for Alice in Wonderland. It is not a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It's not a retelling of The Wizard of Oz. Is it? No. I don't think it's a retelling of The Wizard of Oz. I haven't read the original Wizard of Oz series, although I want to, but I don't think it's a retelling of The Wizard of Oz. But anyway, it's its own separate series. It's sci-fi, fantasy, middle grade series that I really, really love. The next book after that, I read a couple of plays, and then I read They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This has been on my list forever. I will say this book deals with a lot of adult themes and topics. The kids in them are older. They're like, I want to say 17, 18. There is some light cursing in the book, and obviously talks of death. It's in the title, They Both Die at the End. If you don't look too closely at the world that this book is set in, it's a really beautiful book. I think that a lot of people can get hung up on this whole premise of there's this company that knows when people are going to die, and it notifies them by calling them 24 hours basically before they die. And if you really look too much at the world building, you're gonna just kind of get mad, probably, I would think. So the main pull of this book is the story of the characters and what they go through, knowing that their lives are going to end within the next 24 hours, and what they do and who they meet and the purpose of kind of their actions and how they deal with it together, like meeting up and realizing that they're both in the same circumstance. Really fascinating book. Love, love, love the message. Love the story. I really enjoyed it. But like I said, don't look too close at the world or society that they live in, because it is kind of weird. The next book that I read was a manga, one that was introduced to me by my friend who is a huge manga reader. This is called Land of the Lustrous by Haruko Ichikawa. It's about girls who embody the power of crystals. That's pretty much it. And they all represent different crystals. And the main character in this volume, she's not like a battle crystal. She can't go out and fight this darkness that the other crystal girls are fighting. And she's instead tasked with creating a history or a knowledge base for the crystal girls. I felt like I was coming in the middle of this story. It is the first volume, but I felt like there was stuff that happened between some of these characters before this volume starts. So there was a lot of conversations that happened between the girl crystals where I felt I didn't know what the drama was. Like, I didn't know what was going on, but there was some kind of drama. And I don't think it's ever fully explained yet. I haven't read the rest of the series, but I'm thinking about picking it up. Next is one of the books that I was super excited about reading, and I really, really enjoyed it because it is one of my favorite authors. It is Everlost, the first in the Skinjacker trilogy by Neal Shusterman. I am a huge fan of Neal Shusterman. I love the Arc of a Scythe series. It is a masterpiece. So I'm kind of going through his backlog. I didn't hear great things about this, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than Unwind, but it's a little bit younger of a narrative, but I really enjoyed it. I do want to finish the rest of the trilogy. I don't know when I'll get to the other two, but I do want to read the other two. I don't think you have to. I think this is like the Unwind series, where I don't think you really have to read the rest of the series to fully enjoy the narrative. The next book that I read is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, the first in the trilogy, I believe, in the Grisha verse. I, again, didn't hear great things about this book. I knew it was a series, and I knew that I wanted to be able to read the whole series, but read the first one. I enjoyed it. At first, I didn't, because I found the main character to be annoying. She mentions so many times how ugly she thinks she is. It was like really overpowering, like how little she thought of her looks. And I get that that might be like a big mechanic in the world. I just at first really didn't like it. But at the end, it was almost like redeemed. Her view of herself grows and changes as she realizes her true power and potential. But at first I found that really annoying. I ended up getting over it and enjoying the rest of the narrative. The next book after that, oh, great. Everybody's talking about her. Everybody's talked about this. I didn't like it. Obviously I've read a lot of YA, so this is kind of out of my wheelhouse. I also don't read a lot of thrillers. I don't read a lot of dark romance. I haven't read a lot of romance in a long time, but I have read romance. And I enjoy a good romance. I enjoy a good little spicy, whether it's dark or not. I found the romance in this book to be disgusting, boring. I was not interested in any of the spicy scenes. Didn't care for the female main character, didn't care for the male main character, didn't care for anybody in this book. What this book is trying to do is an interesting concept. There are books that have done it better. And I think, to me, the ending, if you have read it, I'm not going to spoil it, but the ending was cheap. To me, that whole thing that authors do at the end of the book to be like, haha, got ya, it's cheap. I have one other book by Colleen Hoover that's on my shelf that I might read. It's not high on my list because I disliked this book so much, but I've heard better things about It Ends With Us, which is the other book that I have on my shelf that I might read. But this was really bad. I'm in that camp. If you're not in that camp, I'm sorry, but if you are in that camp, I highly recommend that you go find the books that do this better. Done talking about that. Okay, the next book, I read Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. At first, it was really difficult for me to get into, mainly because it's a trade paperback, and I hate reading books this small. I just realized that at the end of last year that I really dislike reading books this size. I would much rather have a big floppy paperback or even a hardback. I just don't care for these. So that's why I'm getting rid of a bunch of these. So I find a different edition in order to read this. I did listen to this on audio, and that helped me tremendously to get into this book, because once you get into it, into the meat of it, it's so beautifully written. I love Ray Bradbury. I love Ray Bradbury. It makes me want to go back and reread some of his other stuff that I have read in the past a long time ago. and read some more of his stuff that I haven't read yet, because he's an extremely prolific author. He's written so much that has been turned into TV shows and movies and radio shows and all that stuff. Such a master at writing, and especially this. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm definitely picking up more in the Greentown series, and probably going to go back and read some more Bradbury for sure. The next book, I finished Wicked by Gregory Maguire. This one I was so excited to read this winter. Started reading this when I was in high school. I didn't realize that this came out in 1995. I didn't realize that it was that old, but I started reading this in high school when I fell in love with Wicked the musical in my theater classes. I love Wicked the musical. I love the music. I love the story. It's amazing. That musical is based on this book, but this book and that musical are very, very different. There are a lot of things in this book that I'm kind of surprised by. And when I started reading it in high school, I'm really glad I stopped, because I was not enjoying myself, and I did not fully understand a lot of the stuff that was happening in this book. And I'm really glad that I've tried to read it again and finished it, obviously, because I really, really enjoyed reading this book. I had to admit to myself that it was not going to be like the musical. I had to fully accept that the musical is a completely separate piece of art, and this book is also its own masterwork. I don't know if I enjoyed it enough to want to read the sequel or read other Gregory Maguire stuff. I enjoyed this because I enjoy the musical and I know The Wizard of Oz, but I'm hesitant because Gregory Maguire's writing is it's very different. You really do have to have a little bit of a brain in order to read this and understand it and fully kind of get the message that he's trying to get across. I really don't know if I would read other Gregory Maguire stuff. Wow, have I really gotten through that many books already? All right. I also read Letters to the Lost by Brigid Kemmerer. I got this for Goodreads giveaway on my Kindle, and I started it and I could not stop reading. I cried and I laughed and I giggled, and I love this book. I was so not anticipating to really enjoy this YA romance, but I was so here for it. I was so into it. It was what I needed at that exact moment in time. It was the exact book that I needed, and it was amazing, and I loved it. And there were twists and turns, drama that felt real, but also not completely overcomable. I loved it. I loved all the characters. I loved the romance. I loved it. And I may read the sequel, which I can't remember the name of the sequel, but there is a sequel. And I did read the first chapter of it, and it did seem really interesting to me. So I may go read the sequel. Okay, next. The last two books I've read this month first is The Initial Insult by Mindy McGinnis. I read and loved The Female of the Species a few years back. Loved that book. Female rage, YA, psychopathic, totally here for it. It was so good. It was just brilliant. This, on the other hand, was not. This was a letdown. I am really let down by this. I was excited at first, though. It's like based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, in the same way that The Fall of the House of Usher series on Netflix is based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe. Like, it's not the full story. It's like a bunch of his stories mixed in with like the main plot of that. This is like The Cask of Amontillado with a bunch of his other like stories mixed in. Really great story, by the way. The Cask of Amontillado, amazing. I absolutely love that story. And I was super excited when I started to read this because I was like, oh, I love Edgar Allan Poe and I love that story. And this it was really cool that it was inspired by all these Edgar Allan Poe works, and you kind of could like point out the references to Edgar Allan Poe, and that was fun. But the story lost me, and there were moments where it got really confusing. It was confusing to me. I wanted to really like this, but I'm kind of disappointed. There is a second book to this, And I'm thinking about reading it, but I don't know. I'm thinking about reading it because I feel like I want to know where else it could go, if there is more that could redeem this, but I don't know. Okay, the last book that I read this month was unfortunately another disappointment, and that is Roxy by Neal and Jarrod Shusterman. The first book I read by Neal and Jarrod Shusterman was Dry. It was the first Shusterman book I ever read, and I was actually fearful at the end of Dry. I loved that book, and I could not believe it. It was like right after I had come out of a reading slump, I read Dry. My brain and my emotions were suddenly heightened for like the first time in what felt like years. And I never looked back. I love Neal Shusterman. This is the worst book that he's written out of all the books. And I love all of the books I have read by Shusterman. Arc of a Scythe, loved it. Dry, loved it. Unwind, loved it. Everlost, loved it. Game Changer, I loved it. I have loved every book by Neal Shusterman that I have read. I really did not like this book. Disappointment all around. Had to finish it. I was halfway through and I was like, I don't know if I can keep reading this. I had to finish it because I wanted to know how it was going to actually end. And again, with the Mindy McGinnis book, I was confused the whole time. Okay, it's such an interesting idea. So the book is about basically drug use and abuse, and the drugs are personified, like almost like Greek gods that interact with the humans. It sounds like such a cool idea. Like when I first think about it, when I look at it on the surface, I'm like, that's a really cool plot idea. And then it's executed, and it's not good. It's so weird. It just doesn't click to me. The way that their other books have clicked, this did not click for me. Like, I get the message that they're trying to put forth, but it also is very heavy-handed. And the way that the drugs are personified is so weird to me. To like attribute emotions and motivations and like character development in drugs, in like man-made drugs. It's weird, right? Because they're two drugs that are personified as like the main characters, which are Oxycontin and Adderall. And they're pitted against each other, and they make a bet to basically make a human being overdose on them. Like now as I'm explaining it, it starts to get weirder, and you're like, wait a minute. Like, how? Why? It got so weird, and it just didn't click. It just didn't click for me. And I feel really bad. It makes me feel really bad because I really love all of Shusterman's stuff. And I'm talking way too much about this book because I think his work is great. And unfortunately, this is just one of the ones that's not great. That's it right now. Yeah, so those are the books I read for January. And I'm hoping to read some better ones in February, which will be out soon. So I'll see you in that one. Have a great day. Bye.